It's clear from history that Christians have always run into the plagues of their time. What's not as clear is how we should run into this plague of today. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is Breakpoint. Over the past 2 weeks, I've been thinking a lot about how Christians throughout history understood their responsibility to care for the sick and dying, rather than running for the hills like so many of their pagan neighbors. In many ways, the earliest Christians were the earliest first responders, risking their own lives, even losing them because of what they believed about Christ, about their own lives, about salvation and the love of neighbor, and about human dignity. In our cultural moment, one in which God has graciously given us knowledge of mitigating the spread of disease, as well as a distinctly Christian legacy of hospitals, the love of neighbor involves other things, such as social distancing, so as not to endanger others. But does that mean we disengage completely? How should Christians love their neighbors at this time? Almost from the start of this whole coronavirus threat, even before it was called a pandemic, Dr. Ed Stetzer of the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College and Pastor Rick Warren of Saddleback Church have been working to gather resources and equip pastors and ministry leaders for this challenge. They, in partnership with others, have launched a website, coronavirusandthechurch.com. The resources there are helping churches and pastors with everything from developing online worship and education services to communicating with and caring for their own people to reaching out to the most vulnerable in their communities, including the elderly, the sick, and unemployed. And they're collecting stories of innovative things that are already being done by Christians right now. Tomorrow night, Tuesday, March 31st at 8 p.m. Eastern, Ed Stetzer will join me for a free webinar, How Christians Can Love Their Neighbors During the Coronavirus. Through this webinar, as the first session of a 5-part short course on how to respond to our culture's brokenness, we're offering this session completely free to anyone, even if they're not signed up for the rest of the course. The webinar is for anyone who wants to know how to make a difference in the midst of this crisis, and how Christians are already making a difference, taking the love of Christ and the message of salvation to our culture right now. Now, if you're not available at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow, sign up anyway. The session will be recorded, and anyone who registers will receive a link to the video afterwards. During this free webinar, Ed and I will be discussing best practices, some of which have been developed in just the past few weeks by Christ followers across the country. And Christians are doing this. Today, we've already shared examples on Breakpoint of Chinese Christians who, despite fierce persecution by their own government, passed out face masks and ensured that strangers were supplied with food. Or the Alabama megachurch that already had a huge medical clinic ministry but turned its parking lot into a coronavirus testing center. And of course, my favorite story today is the YWAM base right here in my own backyard of Colorado Springs, and how they pivoted on a dime from a business as ministry operation that trains folks around the world to an organization mobilizing churches and Christians right here in our own community with lettuce. Now, if you missed that story, come to Breakpoint.org to hear my conversation with director Josh Imhoff on our Breakpoint podcast. In Acts 17, Paul described the one true God to the pagan Epicureans and Stoics, and he declared that God determines the exact times in which people live and the boundaries of their dwelling place. In other words, it's no accident that we find ourselves in this time of history in the cultures and communities where many of us find ourselves, quote-unquote, locked down. Our faith and our circumstances are not accidental. God has placed us in this moment, in this place, to be the hands and feet of Christ in this world at this time. Please come to Breakpoint.org today and register for this free webinar with Ed Stetzer, How Christians Can Love Their Neighbors During the Coronavirus. Again, that's Breakpoint.org. I'm John Stonestreet.